All right, well, welcome back to the final task in the FOIs here. We're covering Task G today. Yeah, it's been a bit of a doozy. It's been a couple hours. I've been blowing through these straight through, and we're finally on the last one. Let's celebrate, right? Task G, we're going to celebrate by talking about risk management. Whew! So inherently, we already know aviation is not exactly the safest career to get into, or at least working in general aviation. And like we know, all operations that we do involve risk. So let's talk about what to do to manage that and help deal with it better. First step, let's talk about the principles of risk management. Another acronym, never goes away, is Am I? Am I at risk? Am I? The first principle of risk management is accept no undue risk. Why would you just take a risk? Take a risk. You know, there's no cost benefit, and we'll get to that in a quick sec. But there's no benefit. Why are you adding on risk that you don't need to take? Don't do silly things for no reason. Next one is make risk decisions at the appropriate level. This means that if your decision involves other people, talk to them about it. If you've got passengers in the plane, talk to them about it. Start telling them, say, hey, I haven't flown single pilot at night before, or I haven't flown single pilot IMC in a long time. I'm not so sure about this. Keep them involved. The same thing goes for if you're working for a CFI school and they've given you a cross-country flight and you know for a fact you have to stay VFR and you can probably make it to your destination but you can't make it back. Talk to the chief. Talk to the school. See if they're going to put you up in a hotel for the night because you know you're not flying back. Make decisions at the appropriate levels. Involve everyone who's affected. Next, we can accept risk when the benefits outweigh the costs. Now this comes back to our other A where we say don't accept undue risk. The key difference here is we have an upside to this one and we don't have one to that. Accept risk when it makes sense to do so. You know, don't just take random risks for no reason. Finally, we want to make sure that we integrate risk planning or risk management into planning at all levels. Start from the very beginning. In my opinion, risk management hang on a sec, I don't know why I just did that. There we go, it's an M. You know, in my opinion, risk management starts with your pre-flight planning. It starts with figuring out, hey, my Cessna has a service ceiling of 14,000 and the mountain I want to fly over is 13,700. Is this a good idea? Probably not. I wouldn't do it. So, implement at all stages of planning. If you start with your route planning, chances are a lot later on the line, you're not going to have issues, right? You know, take your route, put it over airports so you can potentially land at. Try to fly over farm areas where you can potentially land if you lose an engine. And that way, when it comes time for the flight and you have to divert, and once again, you're trying to manage the risk in your diversion, you've already set yourself up for success from the beginning. I've talked about this before, setting your student up for success, but do the same thing with yourself. Set yourself up for success and plan ahead for what you're going to do. The best decisions you can make are the ones when you're not, 3,000 feet in the air in a tin can shaking itself apart. So, those are going to be the principles of risk management. Am I? Next, let's talk about the process of risk management. It's pretty similar to aeronautical decision making. First thing, we identify our hazard. Second, we assess the risk. 3, we analyze risk control measures. What can we do to resolve this risk? Then, we make our control decisions. We do it. Then we do it. Then we supervise and review. Let's explain this. We identify the risk. First things first. This looks like it's a risky situation. How risky is it? And we'll get to that in a minute as we talk about assessing and levels of risk. Then we analyze what we can do What can I possibly do to reduce this level of risk, including not flying? That's always an option. Then we make decisions. Which of these options is best for me? Finally, we do it, put this measure into effect, and then see what happens. Did that work? Did it fail? Am I hurtling towards the earth at 300 knots? What's going on? And that's going to be our risk assessment process. Identify, assess, analyze, make, do, and supervise/review. Let's get this guy erased. Now let's talk about level of risk. So we have different levels of risk, different ways we can assess it. We assess risk based on severity and probability of occurring. Now, this might sound like I'm pretty quickly glossing over level of risk, but this is going to get involved with level as well as assessment. So severity and probability. To stop me from having to write this twice, let's go ahead and write it just once. In fact, we're going to write this in the form of a matrix. So the likelihood of risk can be categorized as probable, occasional, remote, and improbable. As far as the severity of risk goes, the outcome can be catastrophic, it can be critical, marginal, or negligible. I would have written that out, but I ran out of space. Arranging these in this manner can give us what we call a risk assessment matrix. Now, this is how we like to evaluate and mitigate risk. So, an item or an event with a negligible outcome that's probable, we might mark right here, where the X is. An item that might have a catastrophic and probable outcome is over here. Now, we use this XY axis, kind of this right XY kind of axis, this appearance, to evaluate our risk. I don't know about you, but if I'm getting into a plane and I think the outcome is catastrophic and it's probably going to happen, I'm not going. I'm definitely not going. Now, if we have an improbable catastrophic outcome, like the entire plane explodes, I guess that's technically a possibility, but it's super improbable. You deal with this on a daily basis. You always deal with this. A remote possibility of a critical outcome. This could be if you've got a propeller that's on kind of loose. Maybe it's got like 8 bolts. Normally it's got like 7 on right now. That's going to be like an occasional or a probable outcome. And that's going to be, depends on where you are. If you're over an airport, could be negligible. If you're in the middle of nowhere, could be catastrophic. It just depends. But the risk assessment matrix is what we use to assess risk and work towards mitigating it. Now, of course, we talked about earlier with mitigation of risk. Oh, got that guy close there. We talk about assessing and mitigating our risk. The best thing we can do is just simply follow our process we outlined earlier. Take a look at what's going on, evaluate, identify the hazard, assess the risk, figure out what you can do, and make decisions to implement them. Analyze different options. And again, like I said, there's always the option to just cancel the flight or bring another pilot with you. Sometimes you are the biggest risk to the flight. Make sure you're aware of that and you use that to your knowledge. I think this is something that a lot of people really overlook. Is sure, I go through my I'm safe checklist, which we'll talk about momentarily, but am I the biggest risk of this flight? Genuinely, not just going through the checklist and la-di-da, I make it, but are you really the biggest risk of this flight? Really self-evaluate beyond just check. So with that, I'm going to skip we're going to actually address 6, 7, and 8 all together. And we're going to start off with PAVE. This is going to be the pilot, the airplane, the environment, and external pressures. So, first things first. First things first is going to be last thing, actually. We're going to start with the external pressures. Is there anyone forcing you to make this trip? Right? This, I think, is, again, a huge factor into people rushing over their I'm safe checklist. Are you training right now? Are you trying to get your rating done before a certain deadline? Is your check ride scheduled and you got to get one more review flight in? These are external pressures. Obviously, we don't want to let these mess people up and make poor decisions, but people are human, and unfortunately, we make mistakes. Next is the environment. Again, we make risk decisions, we make decisions at the appropriate level. So, not at appropriate level, we incorporate into planning at all levels. That's what I meant to say there. So, part of this is our planning. Is the weather going to be good? How bad is the weather going to be if it's not going to be good? What's going on here? Evaluate the environment and the situation around you before you put yourself in a tin can 3,000 feet in the sky. Next, we have the airplane. Is the airplane able to make the trip? Does the airplane have the equipment to make the trip? Is it physically able to match that cross-country performance that you thought you could make? Now, here's the part where we refer back to the pilot. Now, the pilot's checklist is going to be, I'm safe. As I'm sure we're all very familiar with. Illness, medication, sickness, alcohol, fatigue, and eating. Flash emotions, most people covered both of them. Is the pilot sick? Again, we talked about earlier, you don't want to fly with a head cold because you're going to have a lot of issues in terms of pain, inner ear issues. Depends on if you got a sinus congestion or if you got a middle ear blockage, but either way, it's going to stink for you. Are you on any medications? Again, the FAA has a list of prohibited medications and allowed medications. Understand that not every over-the-counter medicine is allowed to fly with. Don't fly with Dramamine. Next, are you sick? Not sick. It's illness, medication, stress. I'm sure people were probably sitting there screaming at me when I wrote that. It's stress. Are you stressed out? Are you worried about what's going on this trip? This kind of maybe ties into your emotion a little bit, your external pressures. Are you stressed? Are you worried about it? Is there a massive pressure on you to get things done? Of course, stress can affect pilot decision-making abilities. Of course, alcohol, 9117, we're all really familiar with it. Don't drink and fly. Straight up on that one, I think it's like an ounce of alcohol on the surface can equal something like 2 or 3 at altitude. It's absolutely crazy. Do not fly and drink, period. Zero tolerance. Fatigue is, of course, the same idea. Fatigue can massively affect pilot decision-making ability. At a certain point, pilots can actually be so fatigued that they effectively fly drunk. So understanding that fatigue can be just as bad as drinking and flying should absolutely scare you away from flying on 30 minutes of sleep. And then finally we have eating and emotion. I've mentioned this a million times before. I get super shaky when I don't eat for a long time. And physically that affects me because I can't control the aircraft as well as I would otherwise be able to. And of course that can be a distraction, right? People don't learn if they haven't met their physical needs. Same idea goes here. People are going to miss risks and other hazards if they're distracted and preoccupied with, I'm really hungry right now, or I'm really worried about something. So that's our I'm safe checklist. Finally, the 5 Ps. Pilot, passengers, plane, plan, programming. So, pilot, already talked about this. I'm safe. Is the pilot ready and able to make the flight? Are the passengers on board with everything? Have they been briefed on the flight? Are they aware of where safety information is in the aircraft, where the exits are, how to operate their seatbelts? Are they aware of the risk involved in the flight, if there is any significant risk? Is the plane capable of making the trip? Can we send this thing on the mission? Is it going to make it? How old is the plane? How long ago has it been up to this altitude before? Does it have the equipment to do it? Do we have oxygen on board? Those types of things. The plan is the flight plan. The mission, as we might say. This is going to be like weather, the route, the fuel we need, how current are our publications that we have. Again, this is kind of the planning for success. This is the backbone of success. Good, successful missions have a plan that's been established on the ground and not in the plane. And finally, programming refers to route changes, GPS application, programming your GPS. How familiar are you with the avionics suite? I've primarily been training on G1000 aircraft for the last year or two, and I would feel very uncomfortable having someone toss me in a 430 and tell me to fly in hard AMC. I don't know how I feel about doing that, and actually I do know. I won't do it. Whereas if someone said, hey, I want you to fly in hard IMC in the G1000, I wouldn't think twice. So understanding the programming of the aircraft and the avionics is a huge part of planning for that success of the mission. So those are our checklists. Those are our I'm safe, our PAVE, our 5 Ps. We talked about mitigating risk, which is going to be involving evaluating the risk, seeing what we can do to bring that down. We assess risk using a risk assessment matrix. Levels of risk are going to be in both severity and probability. The process of risk mitigation and principles of risk management. That's going to be accepting no risk, making decisions at the correct level, accepting risk when the benefits outweigh the costs, and finally, integrating a risk management at all levels of flight planning. So that's Task G. That is risk management. We have made it through the entirety of the FOIs. It only took me like 6 hours or whatever it was. I don't think it was that long, but it still took a while. Made it through Task G. That is that. If you have any questions at all, feel free to comment, message me. I'm not sure how I'm going to get this uploaded on the internet, but do what you got to do. And any errors, again, same thing. Contact me, and yeah. I really hope this was helpful, and best luck to everyone on their check ride. See you.